Okay, everybody, this is Danielle Z back for another episode of the Feeling and Healing podcast. Today, I am so excited to introduce you to my guest, Kam Knight. He is an author, an international best-selling author of a dozen books based off of mental health, reading speed, memory, concentration. But he has this amazing concept that he kind of coined, and it's called internal resistance. So, Kam, I'll let you introduce yourself.
All right, thank you very much for that introduction. So, my name is Kam Knight. I am a mentor, international speaker, and best-selling author of a dozen books in the area of mental, emotional, and physical performance. And how I got into talking about internal resistance is for much of my life, I've been a very motivated individual. I wanted to have a lot more success as I was growing up. I had aspirations to go to an Ivy League school and, graduate and do bigger things. Though most of my life, I always fell short or
Mhm.
missed the mark. And I always wondered why that was. Why
Mhm.
is it if I want to do something and I know what to do and I have the motivation to do it, but for some reason I'm not doing it or I can't do it? And, once I became an adult, there weren't a lot of good answers out there. Some of the more commonly talked about answers includes beliefs or that you need discipline. And those are all important. And don't get me wrong, they're keys to the success that we want. But I always felt like there was more to it. And the more coaching I did, seminars I attended, and books I read, the more I learned about the fascinatingly complexities of the human brain. And over time, I began to realize, hey, wait a minute, there's a part of our mind built to hold us back. There's a part of our brain designed to keep us from growing and making progress. And I call this part resistance. And it's this brick wall that we hit anytime that we want to do something, but we can't, no matter how much we want to do it.
Very, very interesting,
Yeah.
Cam. I know I actually spoke to some of my clients because working with my clients, there is, I will say, we didn't have a term for it. Now I do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of internal resistance that kind of, I kind of your inner self voice, I guess I would have called it before you
Yeah.
defined it as inner resistance. But a question one of my clients had actually was, what is the difference between hesitation and internal resistance?
They're both the same thing.
They're both
So,
the same thing.
yeah, internal resistance shows up many ways. Sometimes it's like this overpowering fear that we get that
Mhm.
keeps us from doing it, and we can actually feel it. We know w- we're like in this really intense feelings that is keeping us from moving forward. The
Mhm.
other times, resistance does shows up not as strong. It just feels like there's an invisible wall that we can't move through. Like
Got it.
we're trying to move forward, but as if there's a wall there. Other times, we don't even notice that we're in resistance. We're just in avoidance behavior. We're
Mhm.
either doom scrolling, playing video games, watching, binging on Netflix, but underneath, there is a desire that we want to be doing something else, like we should be doing homework or schoolwork
Mhm.
or working on our goals, but we're not. And other times, it's even more subtle. And so it's really the word hesitation is more just describing an intensity of the resistance that we're feeling. So it's
Got
not something that's fully blocking us, but it's kind of a little hesitation that's kind of making us tiptoe versus fully in inability to move forward type of mode.
Got it. Got it. And I know we kind of were discussing yesterday, and I think that when you with internal, you said you mentioned that you always wanted to go to an Ivy League school, and these things were holding
Yeah,
you back. Like, I guess maybe talk about I know you define your wants, right? Because everybody
yeah,
wants things. We have these lofty goals, but of course we have like short-term wants and long-term
yeah,
wants. And so if you could just elaborate on kind of your definition of the different kind of wants, I think
yeah, yeah.
would be helpful.
Yeah, so we had a really great conversation about this, and I think it's extremely important for people to understand. Before I go into it, I do want people to understand that the part of the brain that creates wants and desires is completely unrestrained. It's
Mhm.
creating endless wants one after another at a pace faster than most people can achieve. And you can think of this part of the brain, which I call the wanting mechanism, as a simple on off switch that gets flipped based on certain cues. It
Okay.
sees someone with nice shoes and it wants it. The latest iPhone comes out, it wants that too. Someone attractive walks by, and we want that as well. The wanting mechanism creates so many wants in a single day. No one person has the time, energy, or resources to achieve in a lifetime.
Oh,
Even
wow.
if we lived multiple lives, we couldn't enjoy, let alone achieve, all the wants that our brain is producing. And that's because the wanting mechanism doesn't understand that our time, energy, and resources are limited. It
Mhm.
simply creates wants. And it
Yeah.
doesn't check to see if a want is enjoyable or if it will be fulfilling. It simply creates wants. Even while we're working on one want, the mechanism will create other wants to chase. And so the wanting mechanism is the reason we buy stuff we don't need, chase things that aren't fulfilling, and it's actually also the reason why people cheat when they're already in a relationship. The
Very.
mechanism pulls us in so many directions, it's difficult to move in any one. So, this is really important to understand because a lot of times we think we're picking and choosing our wants, but more or less they're getting triggered and stimulated. And because they're getting triggered and stimulated inside us, we think we're choosing them. And now we're living in a world with so much more things to do, so many more options. And so there's a lot more triggers and stimuli for the wanting mechanism. And because it's not checking to see if we have the time and energy or if we have other wants already going on, since it's just like an on off switch, it just keeps getting triggered. And
Got it.
so our wants create a lot of challenges. The first challenge is what I call an overactive want. This is where the brain creates all sorts of desires all of the time. It sees something and it wants it. It hears something, it wants that too. In fact, it doesn't have to hear or see anything. The brain creates all sorts of wants, pulling it in all sorts of directions. So before we can even start on one want, it's creating other wants to chase. So this is one of the challenges. Another challenge has to do with a strong one.
Mm.
Um, there's a lot of talk about burning desire these days, and a lot of coaches and experts are saying how you have to have a burning desire. Though I would disagree because when our wants grow, so does our resistance. And a great
True.
analogy, a great analogy for this is one of Einstein's theories. The theory of relativity says that time and space are one and the same. So the three dimensions of time, north, south, east, west, and up and down, as well as three dimensions of space, as well as time, there's the same fabric. In fact, scientists and physicists don't refer to time and space separately, but they call it space time. And in many ways, our wants and resistance are one and the same. It's the same fabric. So, as I mentioned, when our wants grow, so does our resistance. And our resistance growing makes our wants grow even more. And that in turn makes our resistance grow even further. And very quickly, this becomes this feedback loop where
Mm.
now we want this thing really bad and we can't have it really bad. And I know everyone listening here has had moments where they wanted something really bad, but things weren't moving for them. And as soon as they let it go, things began to fall into place.
Yeah.
Well, it's because of
Mhm.
this principle. And
Interesting.
yeah, and then we have what I call immediate wants. This is a want for something right now, right away, or when things aren't moving fast enough. And what I tell people is most people can have most anything they want if they can be patient about it. And that's because our own impatience becomes a hindrance to getting the want. And that's because impatience is painful. It's extremely painful. It
Absolutely.
yeah,
Mm.
it's so painful that we want to do
Uncomfortable.
uncomfortable, and it's so uncomfortable that we want to do anything to get rid of it.
Get rid of it.
And
Yep.
oftentimes we will get rid of the want just to remove the pain that the impatience is bringing. So these are three aspects of our wants. I don't want to go too much into
Yeah.
just rambling. So if there's something you want to
Yeah.
say, or
No,
if you want me to
I
keep going, I can.
absolutely. No, I was curious because as you were talking, about the wants and how I was thinking just from what I know, and as I think we talked about this yesterday, as a potential mental health professional and in the field, I'm going to school. I'm amazed how little they teach us about the brain.
Yes.
And I personally am very interested about it because I know of the brain's the muscle. And when you were mentioning the wants, they just like don't have any limit to them. It kind of reminded me
Yeah.
of like dopamine a little bit. Like that's
Yeah.
obviously the molecule of more. Like the dopamine just wants more and more and more. It doesn't know when to stop. It doesn't have any limits. But I
Ex-
know that you mentioned kind of like maybe like little like tricks of the brain. I was thinking that, because I know that, for instance, I know this, and this is why positive affirmations and cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy is so effective is because our brains are wired to go to the negative first. So
Yeah.
if there's, positive and negative situation, or you're gonna be like kind of go to that doom first before the
Yeah.
sunshine. So could you just
Yeah.
talk about maybe about some of those brain tricks, or the tricks of resistance, if you will, for the brain to maybe overcome it?
Yeah. So there's three there's three parts to the there are three pieces to the internal resistance equation. The first piece is our want. It's
Hmm.
really important to understand this aspect of the want because it's easy for the brain to trigger these wants and desires. And if we're not careful, we can get lost in them. We
Hmm.
can pick one want, and as we're working on one, our brain trigger another. And then when we move to the other, our brain trigger it again. And when we move to that, we're jumping from one thing to another, but not making progress in any of them. And
Hmm.
then the second piece to it is the resistance itself. And it's important to understand that anytime we do have a want or desire, that desire gets evaluated by this part of the brain, which I call resistance, using a whole host of criteria. And there's many criteria the brain will go through. It'll check to see if your beliefs are in line with the activity, if
Hmm.
if your identity is also in line. Um, it goes really deep: inner child, family systems,
Hmm.
authority
Yep.
issues, core needs. Um, and if your desire is not aligned with the criteria, the brain will prevent action.
Mm.
Though when the brain stops us from doing something, it doesn't tell us that it's stopping us or give us a reason. And instead, it uses tricks. And that's a third part of the concept of resistance, is that when the brain is holding us back, again, it's not telling us that it's holding us back. It uses manipulative tricks, and it has all sorts of tricks up its sleeve to keep us from taking action. And I can give a story about one trick, and I'll really put into
Absolutely. Yeah,
perspective
definitely.
what
Would
I
love to
mean by
hear.
tricks, and then we can talk about some of the other tricks.
Yeah.
So, several years ago, I heard a woman speak about her journey of addiction, and she described a pattern that addicts fall into that she herself fell into. And she said that many addicts know what they're doing is wrong.
Hmm.
When they're searching for the next hit, a part of them knows that they should stop. But there's a sneaky, deceptive trick that keeps them from stopping. And that trick is they tell themselves, after the next hit, I'll stop.
I'll be done. Yeah.
After the next one, I'll stop. I just need to do it one more time, and after, I'll stop. And here's the thing, they keep saying this: after the next one, I'll stop. I just need to do it one more time, but after, I'll stop. And when they say it, they're convinced that they'll stop. Absolutely convinced. In their mind, they truly believe after the next one, they'll stop. And the reason I bring up this story is because I know for a fact every single person listening is doing this somewhere in some area of their
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
A desire comes up, and in that moment, they say, I'll do it later. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it this week. I'll do it next month, or I'll do it next time. And when they say it, they're convinced they'll do it later or next time. Absolutely convinced. In their mind, they truly believe they'll get to it later or next time. But then when the later and next arrives, they push it off to the next and next and next until one of two things happens. Either one, they're married, have two kids, a stressful job, and as a result, no more time, or they pushed it so much that they forgot to go altogether. And in both cases, the resistance wins because now they're not doing the thing, and that's what resistance wanted. And I call it a trick because when we're saying later or next, again, we don't realize our brain is stringing us along to keep just pushing it off until we do forget or get too busy. And this is just one of the tricks, but we have so many other tricks going on. A lot of times we will make excuses.
Mm-hmm.
So, being in the profession that you are, I'm sure you've had moments when you've given someone advice or suggestion, and before they could even let you finish, they started throwing up of excuses of how it can't work, won't work, or it won't work for them.
Absolutely.
Well, oftentimes it's not even them making the excuse, it's resistance throwing up the excuses.
Interesting.
And the resistance will say things like, I don't have time, I don't have energy, I don't have the money. And they can go to great lengths to make up those excuses like, this goes against my beliefs, this is not in line with my values. And oftentimes that's BS because most people are doing things that go against their beliefs and values, but it only shows up when there's resistance.
Hmm.
And what's really interesting to know is that the challenge with the resistance is knowing the difference between the voice of your desires and the voice of your resistance, because they're both our voices. Because the voices in our head, we think we're thinking them. And
Mm-hmm.
because we think we're thinking them, we think the excuses are valid. And because they're valid, we don't take action. So that's another trick. But these tricks can go pretty deep. I even say that when we get sick, it's likely a trick that's keeping us from moving forward because when we're sick, we don't have any energy to do
Yep.
anything. And because we can't do anything, we can't do the thing that's gonna move our goal forward. And because we don't do that, resistance wins. And usually, some of the more extreme things like getting sick or accidents, they usually show up when you're at the cusp of getting to the next level or getting
Mm.
to the finish line.
Pushing through the resistance a little bit.
Yeah, well, they show up because you're about to achieve the goal, you're about to get to the next level, but there's so much resistance that
And it shows
y-
up in your body, you mean?
it's a last ditch effort of the resistance.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah,
That's very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. Because, like I said, when we're sick, we can't do anything. So we can't do work on the goal or move forward at all. And
Yeah.
when we get into an accident, it takes a lot of mental resources and energy and time and even money to rectify the accident. And because we're spending all that time on that, we're not doing the thing that we want to be. And as
Yeah.
a result, resistance wins again. So the
Yeah.
tricks are really important because a lot of times we think we're choosing or making the decisions that we are, but oftentimes they're tricks that are keeping us from moving forward or it's to stay stagnant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that think some manifestations, if you can agree or disagree with me, but I think in my mind, I'm thinking of them right now of like kind of internal resistance where internal resistance wins is like self-sabotage.
Yes.
Maybe like struggling with anxiety, if you have a deadline or have a lot going on and you have to just get all things done and people, get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Maybe obviously procrastination, big one.
Yeah.
I mean, people waiting to the last minute to get things done.
Yeah.
And just as you said, I'll do it later. I'll do it later. Then later is now.
Yeah. So a great way to understand the concept that I'm talking about is we've all heard about the fight and flight response, right?
Yep.
It's a response all animals down to single cell organisms have. And this response either helps us stay with the task or makes us run away.
Mm-hmm.
And as we humans have evolved, so has our flight response. Now that we live in towns and cities where most property is owned by someone, we can't run away to someone's
Mm-hmm.
house or someone's land. And so, and if we did run away to someone's house and land, we couldn't live off of their land. So when our brain wants us to make us run away, it does it in other ways. And that's what internal resistance and procrastination and sabotage are. It's
Mm-hmm.
our brain's way of making us run away from a task, activity, or goal. Again, that's what procrastination and sabotage are. And procrastination and sabotage are a manifestation of resistance. the brain doesn't, for one reason or another, want us to do something, and it either procrastinates, makes us procrastinate, it makes us sabotage,
Mhm.
or we fall into these other tricks that, um, what's the word, keep our momentum and progress really, really slow and not moving in the right direction.
Got it. Yeah, and I was just thinking too, as you were talking, kind of ways to overcome internal resistance. I mean, I know that I'm a big, I mean, you mentioned I think a really poignant point for kind of mental health and just emotional processing when you said, when you're when you're experiencing resistance, it doesn't feel good. It
Yeah,
feels uncomfortable, you're impatient, you just want to move on to the next thing, but sometimes
yeah,
sitting in the feeling and experiencing it because you can't regulate emotions you haven't felt. So,
yeah,
I think sometimes sitting with it, of course, I mean, practicing self-compassion,
yeah,
obviously seeking support, trying to, but I think I shared with Cam yesterday that I struggle with anxiety.
yeah,
And part of I've learned a big just action step that I take is literally to take action. I
yeah,
just tell myself when I'm feeling a little anxious or, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, I'm like, just get up and do the next task. And by the
yeah,
time I'm on task like 2 or 3, I'm like, all right, like why was I even worried about this, you know?
yeah. No, the emotional piece is huge. Unfortunately, emotions don't get a lot of attention, especially
They
in
don't.
personal development. And the attention that they are getting is more on emotional intelligence, where you kind of learn about emotions and how to manage them.
Yeah.
But there's there's more to it than that. And our emotion, most everything we're doing has an emotional charge. So our wants have an emotional charge. It's this like emotional push to move forward or to go after something or to have something. And sometimes, and one of the ways I help people work through like the want, if they have a strong want or they have a immediate want, is not to actually chase the want, but
Mhm.
to reduce the want. And the
Mhm.
way to reduce it is to sit in the feeling of the wanting, sit in the pain of wanting it, not having it, and wanting to do whatever to get it. Because when we can sit in the emotions of it, it actually helps us subside. And once the emotion or the pain subside, so does the want. And when the
Mhm.
want subsides, so does resistance, and it becomes easier to do that thing. And then a lot of times when we do get that feeling of overwhelm, that's actually a trick of resistance.
Mhm.
Because how many times have we done something that we thought was going to be much bigger and harder, and when we did it,
And
it
then,
wasn't
yep,
so
we're like,
bad?
oh, yeah, it was
Yeah.
easy. Yeah.
Well, the reason resistance does that is so we don't move forward with it, or that we move forward in a slower way. Because when something feels too big, then we get exhausted just thinking about it.
Mhm.
And because it's so big, we don't want to do it. And when we don't do it, resistance wins. And again, these feelings of anxiety and even fear are a response to resistance, because a lot of times people ask, when I talk about resistance, the first thing that comes to their mind is fear, as if fear is the reason they're not able to do something. And what I say is that fear is in response to resistance. So fear comes up when the brain has decided it doesn't want us to do something, and it'll trigger fear to keep us from doing it. And again, the intensity can vary. Sometimes people can feel a very strong fear towards
Absolutely.
a task or activity, and sometimes it's mild. But regardless, it means that there's, for some reason, a part of their brain doesn't want them to do that thing.
Mhm.
And the same thing with anxiety. Anxiety is just on a lower end of the fear spectrum. So when people do experience fear and anxiety, there's a good chance that there's some resistance at play, meaning there's some part of their brain that doesn't want them to do that thing or do it as fast as they're wanting to do it or to be as successful with it.
Yeah.
And so it helps to kind of look at the causes of resistance.
Gotcha. And I was just thinking as you were talking to being focusing on I with a lot of my clients, they're I mean, I work with some people that are just trying to define their core selves. I work with clients that are trying to heal. I work with clients that are trying to, just be the best
Yeah,
version of themselves. But the common thread between all those things, and they always say as a potential therapist also, that we're change agents, and change is hard. And I think
yeah,
you would agree that we live in a very, very rapidly changing society
yeah,
and world. So, do you think that that obviously impacts the amount of internal resistance in our brains because
yeah.
things are changing so rapidly, right?
Yeah, so to understand why change is so hard, it helps to understand that we are made up of life forms so
Mhm.
small that they can't be seen with the naked eye. So billions of molecules come together to form the cells in our body, and billions of cells form tissues, and tissue combinations form organs such as the heart and lungs. And
Mhm.
together, these organs form systems, and the
Yep.
systems make up us.
Yep.
Now, it took years for all the cells, tissues, muscles, organs, and systems to come together and line up the way that you do. And that's really, in a lot of ways, habits are. All the individual parts of us, down to the very cells, lining up a certain way for a certain task, for a
Mhm.
certain way of thinking, acting, and behavior. And that can't be changed easily because all the individual parts of us have to change and rearrange and
Yep.
realign. So when we look at it from this perspective, we understand why change is so hard because we're made up of these much smaller components that have to shift. And it doesn't happen just by wanting to change and thinking to change. We need to give it time. And unfortunately, like you said, we're living in a time where we need to be up to speed with so many more things. And it is creating a challenge because it is putting a lot of stress on the body, which is why we are getting a lot of anxiety and anxiousness. And I think one of the ways to handle this is to get a lot of clarity and focus around what it is that you want to do and have, and not be chasing so many different things. And
Yeah.
not only did I mention the challenge to our wants or our wanting mechanism being unrestrained and wanting all these things, we have to do a better job of restraining it and making sure we aren't going in so many directions. Because if we can do that, then there's not as much need for the level of change that we feel like we have to keep up with. And the more focused we are, the more singular direction we're going in, the easier it becomes to manage the changes as we're not having to deal with as many changes as we would if we're
Absolutely.
trying to chase so many other things.
Absolutely. Kind of setting those, like, I mean, I'm a big boundaries person in external relationships, but setting those internal relationships with,
Yeah,
those boundaries in your internal relationships and your inner world or and as you were talking to, and you've said this multiple times, you explained, kind of the mind body connection and how we're made up of systems, which I love being a MFT in the making. But there's
yeah,
a model of therapy called, I don't know if you've heard of it, called internal family systems.
yeah.
Yeah.
IFS. Yeah, it's
IFS, yes.
becoming
So
it's becoming quite
it
popular
is,
now.
it is. And
Yeah,
so I feel that, and maybe let me know if we're on the same track here, but I feel like IFS, I mean, excuse me, internal resistance is like a manager. So, and for those of you on the podcast that don't know, internal family systems is a type of a modality of therapy where you look at yourself as if you are your core self, and then you have different parts. It
yeah.
was
Parts
founded
of you.
by,
Yeah,
yeah, the parts. So you have your core self, which is when you're your natural essence, when you're calm, centered, grounded. But then you have your firefighters, which
yeah,
they come out, they're the first responders, right? Like they could come out in bursts of anger. Um, they kind of just they're blinded by they don't even they're their reaction to a stimuli.
yeah,
Then there's
yeah,
the managers, which I think internal resistance would fall underneath because it's kind of like it's trying to control the situation, like anxiety or
yeah,
maybe nervousness or something like that. And then exiles, which are your wounded parts and your trauma.
yeah,
They call them exiles because you stick them in the basement. So
yeah, yeah,
I think internal resistance would fall into that manager. And then maybe like I mean firefighter, I don't know what maybe a firefighter would be, maybe like
Yeah.
self-sabotage or like really, really bad procrastination
Yeah.
or something like that. But I think internal resistance fits really well in that
He's
manager.
trying to managing
Yeah,
like all these.
manager.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I do get asked about internal family systems quite a bit.
you
And
do.
yeah, and I can't say I've gone as deep as probably you or other people,
Yeah,
but from
no,
my
no.
understanding, they're very aligned because I talk a lot about their wants. We have different
Mhm.
wants and different drives, and we can have
Well,
wants
those
for
are parts of yourself, right? Your
that's
wants and
exactly what
drives
it is.
are parts. So,
Yeah, more or less. So the different in IFC, they're talking about what is this part one or what is this
hmm
part one, and
hmm
it comes down to all the different wants that we have. And there is one part that is trying to be the manager in some respects. And I like the analogy I like to use is our wanting mechanism and the parts of our wants is like a kid in the candy store.
it
Have
just
you ever
wants
seen? Yeah.
everything. No,
And
no
then
rules.
and then the resistance is like the parent trying to keep it in check. And so that's how I like to see it.
I
There
like that
was,
metaphor.
yeah, yeah, there was something I did really want to riff on, but
Yeah.
I lost it. When it comes to me,
Oh,
I'll let you know. Yeah,
yeah, no, maybe parts. We're talking about parts, the IFS.
yeah,
I don't know, but yeah, and going back to because I'm always so interested with the brain, and I know you're probably more well versed than me, so your wants, but then there's dopamine that comes in that's like I want more,
yeah.
and then I guess internal resistance is like no, like it kind of like cuts off the dopamine.
Yeah, so again, the part of the brain that creates wants and desires works separately and independent of the part that allows us to act on that desire.
Got it.
This is really important. The part that creates wants works separate from the part that allows us to act on the want. So the part that's creating wants, as I mentioned, the wanting mechanism, it's kind of just like it's just a trigger. It sees something, it wants it. It thinks about something and it wants it. And then it
hmm
creates that dopamine hit to go after and get it.
hmm
But again, that part was never meant to check to see if that thing would be good for us, healthy for us, or even achievable. Its only purpose is just to create the want. And then the other part, resistance, is that does more of the analytical work, checking to see if we should go after it. And so it's not like necessarily blocking the dopamine. Dopamine is at play. And it's really important you brought up the dopamine part because this is one of the reasons our wants can kind of get out of control because it feels so good when we get that hit of
Yeah.
desire.
Yeah.
It
Oh,
feels
absolutely.
like, especially when we see someone attractive, we want them.
Of
And those
course.
feelings are euphoric.
Yes.
And what's interesting is one of the reasons resistance shows up, or one of the reasons that we're not able to act on our desires, is because the actual action removes a lot of that positive feeling. So then we want something else to give us a positive feeling.
Yep.
And we'll never act on it because the effort it takes to act on it means we won't get to stay in that dopamine. So this is one of the reasons people get caught in a pattern of going from one want to the next because it just feels good
Yeah, it says
when
that's that short term. Yeah, that
yeah,
dopamine hit. Yeah.
yeah. So it's almost like they become addicted to want.
Yeah.
Now I talked about the concept of the tricks of resistance. And what's really interesting is a lot of times we have an overactive want where we go from one want to another
hmm
as a trick, meaning if the brain doesn't want us to do something, it will prevent us from doing it. And it has very many ways to keep us from doing it. And one of those ways is that it'll have us just get lost on a bunch of different wants. Because as soon as we start one thing, the want it'll trigger one for something else. We start something else, it triggers a want for something different still. And as long as we're jumping from one want to another, we're not making any progress. We're not moving forward. And as long as we're not moving forward, resistance wins. And
Yeah.
so this could also be a trick of resistance, meaning there's something going on internally that is making us not want to move forward or make any sort of real progress in life. I know it's getting like really deep into this stuff, but this
Oh
is,
no, no, no. I think this is great. And
yeah,
I told you something that just popped in my head because we were talking about internal resistance and the feeling, fear. That's the
yeah,
number one feeling that kind of shows up when internal resistance, that part comes up.
yeah,
And from the little I know our brains are we're years from now they're gonna probably gonna look at us and how much they've changed, but they're not as sophisticated. They're very sophisticated muscles, but when it comes to fear, it's still, as you said, has that kind of animalistic fight or flight. And
yeah,
nowadays that we live in such an overstimulated world,
yeah,
our fight or flight response, unfortunately, is like is it's that's why I think there is a heightened level of anxiety,
yeah,
unfortunately, around the world because we're always being stimulated by something. We're always
yeah,
so I
yeah.
think that would impact, why maybe maybe in your work that you're doing around internal resistance, I would imagine just from theorizing of what I just said, hypothesizing, that there would be maybe um cases where unfortunately a resistance does win more in today's world,
I
unfortunately.
I think it is. I think it is.
Yeah.
And when you were talking, I remember what I wanted to say.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, yeah. We're living in a time now where one of the more important skills that we need to develop is the ability to say no.
Yep.
Say
Oh,
no to a lot more things just because we have so many more options. Saying no, we have so many more TV shows, so many more channels, so many
absolutely.
more people doing different things that want us to support. And we're becoming like overly extended. So it's really important for us to say no to options, no to people, no to a lot of the distractions, such as the television shows, movies, as well as video games. And it's probably one of the most important skills
Absolutely.
that's critical for this time. Now, 30, 40 years ago, that wasn't as much of an issue. It was more about saying yes to opportunities because opportunities didn't come by as much. And if you didn't say yes, you didn't know when they were going to come by. Now it's just so
It's
much in our
endless.
face.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
have, I think especially in American US culture, we've always just had a lot of abundance. Because I know,
Yeah.
just to use a metaphor, for instance, I know a lot of the peasant dishes in France, they use like, really, really cheap cuts of meat, you know what I mean? Like like I forget the name, I think bourguignon is like, like a lot of the stews that use
Yeah.
cups of meat, and that because that's all they had. And you know what I mean? And they adapted based off of what they could get. But in America, I feel like we've always had so many options with everything,
Yeah. Yeah.
that, as you said, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I actually
Yeah.
just posted on social media about this, that a very important sentence to learn is no. It's a
No.
one-word sentence,
Yeah.
but it's very
Yeah.
powerful.
And it's hard to practice because we can talk about it and say, yes, we need to say no. And here's why, because there's just so many more options.
Yeah,
But to actually do it is difficult because when we do say
absolutely.
no, there's the fear of missing out comes up.
Hmm.
There's guilt.
And
There's
shame. Yeah,
regret,
yeah,
all of that. And that does make it hard. But I want to give permission to everyone listening that it's okay for you to say no and not feel bad about it. In fact, it's a muscle that is extremely important for you to exercise, especially now. Especially now, if you're trying to move forward and make progress in life.
absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. And I think that's a good place. Cam, thank you so much. This such a enlightening conversation. I love
Thank you.
on how we just took internal resistance. We weaved it into
Uh,
parts. I'm loving
yeah,
this as a
yeah.
therapeutic model. Everybody, this episode it will be live on all your favorite podcast channels and also on my YouTube channel, Feeling and Healing. Hope everybody has a great week.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And I
Hey,
just want to say I am an author of a dozen books.
yep.
If you want to
Go to
get them,
Amazon.
yeah, that you can type in Cam Knight on Amazon or just go to camknight.com. KAMKNIGHT.com. I have a course called Conquer Internal Resistance to Achieve Your Next Goal, and you can get more information on that at camknight.com. And then I also do one-on-one work where I develop a technique that helps people go into their own unconscious and to see what their own resistance is. And if you want to do that, it's one-on-one with me. And you can learn more about it by emailing me at mentor@kamknight.com.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody.